Hey everyone, how are you doing today? So I'm going to be completely honest and transparent with you guys. This is a video that I've wanted to make for a very long time. As you may or may not know, a while back I made a documentary about the sequel trilogy, its downfalls and why the 3 movies failed. In that video, I discussed the treatment of Star Wars by Disney and why it was a disappointment to the majority of Star Wars fans. Furthermore, I also talked about why I believe Disney's handling of George Lucas's creation and their blatant disrespect of the creator and his wishes for the incredible space opera franchise that is Star Wars was horrific. Upon reflection of making that video, I realised that there was so much more that needed to be discussed, specifically in light of George Lucas and the relationship he's had with the Star Wars fan community. You see, it's no secret that there's been an eternal conflict between the fans and the franchise, and while I thought that this divide was most evidently clear throughout the years of the sequels, it was actually throughout the creation of the prequels that the fans and George Lucas were most divided. To that end, this documentary will explore how the reception of the Star Wars Prequel Trilogy by fans tarnished one man's vision and hope to complete something he started that was meant to be epic and revolutionary in movie history. In retrospect, the prequels became very popular many years after their release, but throughout the time of their initial cinematic debut, they were heavily criticised. I've always been of the opinion that there's nothing wrong with loving or hating a movie, but let's be honest, we all know how toxic the Star Wars fandom can be, and with regards to the prequels, the matter was no longer something between fans and film. It became personal, deeply personal, and many people took things way too far. This documentary seeks to explore the impact of the creation of the prequels. This includes all of the reasons why the prequels were nothing short of a masterpiece and the perfect preface to the original trilogy. In this video, I will also give my reasons for why I believe critics of the prequels were very wrong, and it has the aim of explicating how the minor details of the prequels are what made the trilogy so great. Overall, the documentary will show how the separation between George Lucas's vision and the unappeasable fans caused for an unprecedented wave in a fandom that would forever shake it to its core and leave it damaged beyond repair. With that said, I really hope you guys enjoy my documentary, and may the Force be with you, always. It was on the 1st of November in 1994 that George Lucas first sat down with the intent of starting to write a script that would become the opening film for the Star Wars Prequel Trilogy. He famously stated, "All I need is an idea." How would he begin? Where would he start? What was his vision? Up until that point, Star Wars fans were only introduced to events that occurred after the Battle of Yavin. To have to create a backstory to every event, every major character, and every iconic moment in the original trilogy was a daunting task, to say the least. That, coupled with the fact that you had to please the most passionate fandom in the universe. No words are enough to explain just how frightening such a prospect must have been for him. The incredible thing about a creator like George Lucas is that he already had the one key to unlock all the doors of possibility. The one plot point that would run throughout the prequels, that was undoubtedly at the heart and core of the Skywalker saga. This trilogy would have to be all about Anakin Skywalker. And I'm going to repeat that again. This trilogy would have to be all about Anakin. The reason I put such emphasis on this point is because many fans forget that the whole reason Mr. Lucas set out to make a prequel trilogy in the first place was to visually demonstrate the tragedy of Darth Vader. How a young boy turned dictator, considered to be the biggest villain of all time, was in fact the victim all along and not the perpetrator. After all, Anakin was the chosen one, and in the words of George Lucas, even when he was Vader, he was still the chosen one. He never stopped being the chosen one, the one who was destined to bring balance to the Force. So how would he achieve this? And what would the first film be about? What would it look like? I could go into all the ins and outs of plot ideas that Lucas initially had, but that would be quite a futile task. Instead, let us look at what we got in the movie, how the fans responded, and then I'll explore why I believe the fans got things very wrong. On the 16th of July 1999, when The Phantom Menace dropped in cinemas, fans were anticipating the return of Star Wars as if the gates of the movie theatres were the gates of heaven. Some had even camped out, waiting for days or weeks to burst through the doors and take their seats as their long dream to see that iconic scroll with John Williams' timeless score would finally make itself manifest. And so, the movie was. So the big question is, how did fans react? Well, the overall reaction was very mixed. It wasn't the first time that a Star Wars movie caused such controversy and created a divide in the fandom. In 1983, when Return of the Jedi hit cinemas, fans were a little disappointed by the childishness of the affair, having seen such an incredible sequel that was The Empire Strikes Back 3 years prior. However, the negative response and backlash to The Phantom Menace wasn't that same kind of divisiveness that Episode 6 had caused. Sure, some fans liked the movie, but the ones that didn't, really didn't like it. In 1999, the internet was young, but thriving with forums, and just like in modern times, where people take to social media to express their hate for movies after they've watched them, The Phantom Menace was the center point for endless hate on these online Star Wars forums. Not only that, people took things a step further and blamed George Lucas directly as if he had committed treason against their beloved franchise. They sent death threats to the poor guy and failed to realize that he was the creator of said franchise. His vision was the vision. It was canon. So let's look at why people took Episode 1 so badly. Now, I will preface this by saying I'm a big fan of the prequels, but they are not without their flaws, and anyone who's honest has to say this. Just like any movie, our response is completely subjective, and there are always people who believe that they would have hypothetically done something better. But I'm going to keep toxicity away from this video at all cost. Out of all of the plot points in The Phantom Menace, there is a trend of the ones that are frequently criticised. These are that there's no protagonist, that there's not enough lightsaber duels, and that there are too many useless characters and comedy relief. Now, I'm going to defend each of these points separately. Fans were disappointed that they received no protagonist, but simply, if you can't work out that this film is about Anakin, then in the words of Obi-Wan Kenobi in Revenge of the Sith, you are lost. Yes, there are many multiple characters: Qui-Gon, Yoda, Obi-Wan, the Jedi Council members, Darth Maul, Palpatine, Padme, but that's because George Lucas knew the first film in the trilogy would have to set the scene for all of the Star Wars movies by providing a wider context of what the entire Skywalker saga was all about and where its origins lay. In essence, imagine if the movie was just following young Anakin on Tatooine. It would have been so long and boring. We just needed to see that he was the chosen one and who his initial master was before being placed in the hands of Obi-Wan. Regarding the lightsaber duel argument, we got the perfect one, and I don't know what anyone is talking about if they criticize this. Qui-Gon, Maul and Obi-Wan, that coupled with the incredible Duel of the Fates music playing in the background, made for an incredible ritualistic setting, adding a sense of mystery to the whole event, and including this mysterious element to the Jedi Order. Now here's something remarkable. Duel of Fates was not titled by mistake. It was deliberate, because in the fight between Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon and Darth Maul, there was a literal duel of fates going on. Essentially, the fate of Anakin was dual, and yet it had to be decided by the fight, and it was. Had Maul won, the boy would never have become the Jedi Anakin Skywalker and eventually Vader. So personally, I do not understand what all is the moaning about, that there is no protagonist. Unfortunately, it seems to be a trend in the Star Wars fandom that fans have forgotten how to read nuance within the franchise and notice the subtleties that really make a difference. Now onto the useless characters debate. I must admit that I'm not a big fan of the use of the Trade Federation, for example, simply because I thought the space politics of the Star Wars prequels were quite boring and they didn't add much to the overall story. That, coupled with the fact that they worked in collaboration with Palpatine in the film, was very odd, especially having watched the evil tyrant that Sheev Palpatine was in the original trilogy. It came as quite a shock. As for Jar Jar Binks and the whole comedy relief, I'm certainly not the first person to point out the fact that Star Wars never needed a comedy relief character, and yet we got one. If anything, he was slightly annoying. Having said that, who cares? Literally, who cares? As George Lucas said, he was created and designed with children in mind. And as someone who grew up with The Phantom Menace, I fucking loved Jar Jar. It's only as an adult that I thought, eesh, that's really cringeworthy. But at the time, I thought he was cool and really funny. I had the action figures of him too, and was still able to enjoy the movie fully, knowing full well that he was in the film and knowing his role. Either way, even if people thought that The Phantom Menace was a steaming pile of dog crap, it's no excuse for the abuse, harassment, and even threats that George Lucas received. There is never any excuse for it. And so now we move on to Attack of the Clones, and this is where the hatred for the prequels peaked, and where George Lucas started regretting ever having made the prequel trilogy at all. This movie gets hate for the romance between Anakin and Padme, the excessive use of CGI characters, bad dialogue, we all remember the line about sand, and the fact that we never actually got to see a live action version of the Clone Wars because the movie ends as the Clone Wars began. Let me start with the romance criticism and allow me to say that I vehemently defend this romance sequence between Padme and Anakin. Why? Because when you think about it, this love he had for Padme was the main reason he even turned to the dark side to begin with. It was the aspect of Anakin's psyche that Palpatine manipulated and played on completely. His fear of losing Padme in Episode 3 made him crazy enough to want to use the dark side powers promised him by Palpatine to save her life. We needed a backstory to this love, and Attack of the Clones delivers perfectly. Yes, the fact that he was in love with her at a very young age is really creepy and weird, but aside from this, the romance was a needed element. Sure, George Lucas could have used a different plot point altogether to show Vader's turn to the dark side, and perhaps he didn't need to make it so forced and awkward as a love sequence. But for the fans that would critique it so heavily, this whole love affair between Anakin and Padme, well, they're kind of mistaken, and they don't understand that Star Wars is a space opera, which means it's a soap opera set in space. I don't know if you've noticed, but romance and family are both core aspects of soap operas, and of course of space operas altogether, and Star Wars in general. George Lucas had always planned more love and more family aspects within Star Wars. Now let's talk about the bad dialogue, and I'll admit, yeah, it wasn't great in Episode 2, and even Ewan McGregor almost refused lines on occasions, insisting that George Lucas change them. I don't think there's much else to say except that fans once again really didn't appreciate subtleties that George put in to make the original trilogy make sense. The big highlight of Attack of the Clones, at least in my mind, is that we get to see Anakin flirt with the dark side. The Tusken Raider camp scene was perfect, and we see him snap inside as he's tempted by anger and rage, and he tells Padme his true feelings, while John Williams' slow Imperial March plays in the background. It was excellent, and I really urge people to rewatch this film. And so finally we come on to Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and admittedly, it seems that most people unanimously agree that this is the best prequel in the Star Wars Prequel Trilogy. Personally, I love it. And as for my reasons why I thought it was amazing, I have an entire video about why I believe Revenge of the Sith was the perfect Star Wars movie. And to spare myself and my audience, that means you guys, from repeating the points I made in that video, I'll simply highlight the fact that it was the prequel with the best representation and visual explanation of Vader's fate. I would argue the most pivotal scene is the Battle of the Heroes, where Anakin fights Obi-Wan. It was a scene long anticipated by Star Wars fans since 1977's A New Hope was released, where Vader tells Obi-Wan that the last time they met, he was the apprentice and that he is now the master. We also get so much lightsaber action in the film, and we finally get to see Palpatine in action as a Sith Lord, using a lightsaber instead of just laughing and cheering from a cloaked hood while sitting down. All in all, it was the best prequel, and yet, fans reacted badly once more in 2005 when it came out. Granted, many did acknowledge the fact that it was a fantastic ending to the prequel trilogy, but much like the recent reaction to The Rise of Skywalker, even though it was the best of the 3 films in the trilogy, fans still had the bad taste of the previous 2 movies in their mouths, and they weren't really willing to budge or to accept the fact that these movies were the canon ones that they'd receive. The only difference is, with the prequel trilogy, it was all taken out on one man, George Lucas, and frankly, he was heartbroken. He has always been candid about the fact that Star Wars was his personal baby, his creative child, so to speak. He put his entire emotional and full directive selves into making the prequels, and when fans treated him like crap, it hurt him deeply, and understandably so. So much so that he stepped away, and in 2012, after talks with Bob Iger and Disney, he sold his scripts and the entire Star Wars franchise. If we're being honest here, George deserved better. Sure, Disney were awful to him and threw his ideas away almost instantly. But the way that fans treated him in the early 2000s during the midst of the creation of the prequels, it's pretty unacceptable. In recent years, people have finally realised the qualitative awesomeness of the 3 movies, but nothing could repair the emotional turmoil and toxicity caused by the fandom during the initial release of the prequels. As for today, we can ask the question, where does Star Wars go after the even more divisive sequel trilogy was made by Disney? Well, who knows? But let's not forget that the lowering of the quality of Star Wars films is ultimately not the fault of George Lucas, it's not the fault of Disney Film. It's all down to the fans. And you know what? We kind of deserve it. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching my documentary. I really hope you enjoyed it. I worked really hard on making this. I will please ask you to hit subscribe to my video if you're new and to like this video if you enjoyed it. Please also consider becoming a patron of mine on Patreon. For just $2 a month, you get exclusive access to content not found here on YouTube. It really helps me out as a creator so that I can keep providing you guys with regular and consistent Star Wars content. I'm Star Wars Meg, and I wish you a fantastic rest of the day no matter where you are in the galaxy. Have a good one.